Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for stopping by. Good to see you again. Today I want to talk about a cartoon, of all things. It's a cartoon that amused me as an analyst years ago, and I downloaded it onto my hard drive, and I keep it every once in a while. I look at it and I laugh because it has a lot of truth in a simple cartoon. It's so simple I can describe it. You don't have to see it. I think most of us have been in airport terminals or railroad terminals or some large area, or even a big department store, and you'll have an information desk where you can go up and find out where the train comes or where the plane takes off from or whatever. And in this particular cartoon, there is an information desk. There is a desk, a man standing behind it, and a sign across the top saying information, and nobody standing around talking to him. On the other side is another desk, another man standing behind it, another sign. It says opinion, and it's surrounded by people. That is so true. Opinion, sometimes we're overwhelmed with opinions, and opinions are what we hear the most of, and they seem to be so clear and absolute, whereas information takes more time to absorb and to interpret and to understand. But opinion is a poor excuse for information. Now, opinions are good because I listen to opinions because they give me an idea of what people are looking at, what they're concerned about, and what's going around these days and so forth. And it can also be things that I hadn't heard of before, so there's something to check out and so on. There's nothing wrong with opinions. You just have to accept the fact that it's one person's opinion, or it's an opinion that has been passed around, and they only know it as somebody else's opinion. You need to get the information to find out whether that opinion is really something about Panama or something about that particular individual, that particular set of circumstances. That's a different story. I'll give you an example that has been here since I arrived 13 years ago in February of 2004. It's a rumor, or it's a statement, it's an opinion above all, that is still seen from time to time. Not as much now as it was a few years ago, but still, it still pops up. And that will boil us down to somebody saying, well, as we know, there are all these tall buildings, these new office buildings, these new condominiums, and they're dark at night. You look at them and there are no lights on. They're just empty buildings. So, what is this? This is ridiculous. This economy is nowhere near as good as they say it is. And those tall buildings, they must just be drug money or something like that. Get a kick out of it because they don't care about whether there's anybody living there. Yeah, well, these are opinions, and this one is one of the old ones. It's an urban myth, and it's sort of interesting to see it, I suppose. But it's aggravating because people begin to think this is a real fact. Let me tell you a story. I was sitting out my balcony a few years ago, and there was a 50-some story building not being constructed, not too far from where I was. It was 10 o'clock at night. I was sitting with a Panamanian friend, and Panamanians sometimes hear these things too and believe them. And we were just looking out at a building that had just recently been built. And we could see the outline of it, of course. There are lots of lights on in the city. And it was dark, absolutely dark. And I didn't even think about it because I saw it every night when I was sitting out there. But my friend, Panamanian friend, said, Bob, he said, how can they say that these buildings are full of people? I said, look at that building over there. There isn't a single light on in that building. You can't tell me that people are living in that building. And I said, Charlie, that's an office building, okay, for starters. It's 10 o'clock at night, so you wouldn't expect it to be full of lights. But more to the point is that let's say it was a condominium. Well, condominiums are buildings, that's all. And whether it's an office building or a condominium, the outside is done first. And from a distance, sitting in the balcony in our case, looking at a building, it looks like it is finished. That's what can I say? But the truth of the matter is that it has to look that way before it's ready, because you don't bring in the carpeting, you don't bring in the furniture, you don't bring everything into that building, and when you got 50-some floors to equip to fit out, You don't bring that stuff in until you have walls. You got to have walls, or else you're going to have the weather and damage done. So, I mean, it makes sense. So, from the outside, it looks from a distance as if it is done. But on the inside, a terrific amount of work is still underway, and that can take months for a building of that size to be done. So you can't just assume because it's dark and it looks like it's finished that it is, and that it's empty because nobody rents there or nobody has bought anything there. Actually, these are easy things to get information on. I mean, if Charlie and I had wanted to, I mean, we'd have gone downstairs, walked 4 blocks, and looked at that building straight up. And at 10 o'clock at night, we would have all immediately seen the lobby isn't done. This clearly is still under construction. From a distance, you couldn't tell that. And you couldn't see the base floor from where I was. It was covered by other buildings. So the simple fact of the matter is that you need to really check it out, and it's easy. This is what irritates me with this particular rumor, is that if you really think that's the case, if you know that building is a condominium, for example, I had one beside where I used to live when I first came here. And when it was finished, I heard all these stories going around saying, there's nobody living there, there's no lights on, just 2 or 3. Oh, nobody's bought these places. And I realized it had just gotten its occupancy permit maybe 10 days, 2 weeks before. Well, folks, people don't move in overnight. People who bought these things pre-construction, as was common in those days. This is when a lot of Americans and Canadians were coming down too, as well as Panamanians and others. So once they had bought it, they were waiting for it to be done. They get the notification that it has been completed. They have to complete their payments and everything else. Then they have to pack their bags. They have to move everything. They have to sell their home before they can get down here. It isn't going to happen in a week. So I sat there in my balcony at that building, seeing this one, which is right next to us. And a month later, there were a few lights on, and 2 months later, there were quite a few lights on. 3 months later, there were a lot of lights on. But that's normal. That's how these things develop. So, but if you looked at it in that first couple of weeks, you'd thought, oh, nobody bought. No. If you actually know how these buildings are built and how they're financed by banks and what have you, you realize they go in stages, and if they don't sell, they don't get the money they need to build. They have to sell quite a few in advance before they even start building to convince the bank that it's worthwhile to provide them with money. So this is the sort of thing you keep in mind. So when you see something like that, that's just a statement. You need to have some information to back that up. And if the person doesn't provide that and say, look, I've read here, and this is the source of my information and so forth, there's a report out that says this, and here it is, and this is where you can find it. But then, you have to go and look for it yourself. And I would do that. I do that all the time. I hear opinions. I hear things. I heard this thing running around that a building was tipping over because the foundation hadn't been made properly. And the person was quite insistent the building was tipping over. So I thought, all right. So we went to take a look at the building that was tipping over. It isn't tipping over. It didn't tip over. It's still there, and it's going straight up. How that one got started, I have no idea. But that is the sort of thing you run into. And it's true on many, many other levels, too. Whether it's are poisonous snakes a problem here? Well, if I ever meet somebody who's been bitten by a poisonous snake, I'll let you know. And I'm sure some have, but it is not a problem. It's not something people discuss all the time. We don't live in fear of it. Out in the countryside, in some areas, they have that. It's a problem. Although it seems to be more a problem for their pets that they bring down than it is for them. But still, it's an issue for them. But we aren't dying from that. It's like malaria. No. I'm sorry. When it comes to controlling mosquitoes, Panama is where it all began, the construction of the Panama Canal, when they first had the information that it was the mosquito that was responsible for the spread of malaria, yellow fever, and so forth. And they developed a system to wipe out the mosquito population, basically, by interrupting its life cycle. It's a long story, interesting story. But the point is that no country in this world has more experience and for a longer period of time than Panama on mosquito control. So yeah, you can find them out in the countryside. I see one every couple months in the city. I don't even think that often. Very rare. But out in the countryside, sure. And out in one of the islands in the bay, you go out to an island that doesn't have any people living there, and you can be carried off by the mosquitoes. They aren't necessarily disease-carrying, though. There are different varieties of mosquito. So we have very, very, very few malaria cases here, and they are, the only way you're going to get it, you have to worry about it, is if you decide you want to go out into the deepest part of the jungle. Why, I don't know, but you're an adventurer and you want to do that. And you better take a malarial drug. This is possible. It's possible. Not likely, but it's possible that you can get it. Otherwise, though, if you're a normal person, it's nothing you need to worry about. And I have people who come down here with very powerful anti-malarial medicines because they read somewhere, some super conservative site in like a health site or something. You have to be careful for mosquitoes from malaria in Central America or South America and Panama and so forth. These drugs, I've taken them when I've needed them in many of the countries I've worked in Africa particularly. I don't like them, and I won't take them unless I absolutely have to. I tell you that. Unless you have a very good reason, don't use them because they can be dangerous themselves. Sorry to say. I see people getting really upset about it. Let me put it this way. If there's a really, really serious problem here in Panama, you're going to hear about it. You'll hear about it. You can find out information. There's plenty of information out there because it's a major problem. But if you don't, if it's just a particular site, especially a site with an agenda, whether it's economic or political or commercial or whatever, and they want to shock you with something and they drop something, little bomb like that out at you, you need to go out and find the facts. And they're there. That's what Google is all about and 50 other search engines. The information is there if there's any serious problem that exists in another country. And you should check it out, of course. And ultimately, what you really want to do is come down here, and then within a relatively short period of time, so many of these things just disappear. And you get to look at our business section on a regular work day, and you realize those buildings have a lot of people. They're really, really active, I can assure you. So keep it in mind. Opinion is one thing, but information is what's critical. And eventually the best information comes from your own experience. But before that, there are sites. You can go to Wikipedia and get a lot of information just there. And typically, if it's a major problem, it gets mentioned in Wikipedia. But there are a lot of other sites, too, that can provide authoritative information on any of a number of matters. And it's good to get that. And then eventually, you can ask me or somebody else. If it's a general question, I might be able to give a response. And, of course, you'll come down and talk to people and see people here, and you'll find out that we don't sit around worried about malaria, and we're not worried about empty tall buildings around the city. Not at all. It's funny. The big burst of construction activity has come and gone. It came for a good reason. This city the government took measures to make this as attractive a city for international business as possible. And they did what nobody else had done, obviously, in the region, which is sit down with these businesses and say, what are you lacking? What is it you need that you can't find? What would make us attractive? Because we're just a small city compared to Rio de Janeiro or something of that sort. And businesses told them. And Panama is a business country. Don't ever forget it. We're probably more of a business country than any other country in Latin America. And we've challenged the U.S. and Canada on this, too. They're very much business-oriented. This is the canal country. Business has been the story of this country since the Spanish arrived 500 years ago and discovered the shortest distance between the two oceans where they can ship their gold and their silver. So it's always been associated with business, and the government made very good decisions. Several laws were passed that protected the country, but at the same time took away some of the rules and regulations and some of the procedures that were leftovers from the 20th century that didn't make any sense anymore. And as a result, we had a massive influx, and we continue to have them moving in, businesses. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of people, and they bring with them their families. And so we get tens of thousands of expatriates that come over the last decade or so to live and to work here. And those buildings and those condos and what have you, it's a good thing they were there. But so in the early stages of that, when we didn't have anywhere near enough to satisfy the demand that was beginning to come in, A friend of mine and I stood out on my balcony, and we counted 13 of those really tall cranes that they use for the skyscrapers. 13 of them from my balcony, and I only see a small portion of the city. Today, just before this video, I went out on the balcony and I was only able to find 5. In a lot of cities, 5 would be pretty good when it's just one small part of the city, but by our standards, this is fairly slow. So these buildings are as much, whether they're condos or whether they're office buildings or whatever, they're an expression of what has been going on in economic growth, not only in Panama City, but in a number of other cities. But in Latin America, in Panama City, it's especially noticeable. Now, that's basically the story I wanted to provide you today regarding information and opinion, but I like to, if I have something of interest you might like seeing, or a few of you might, I'll share it here, and I'm going to put a link down in the description below. This is a website, very impartial, that deals with skyscrapers. And they list the top 200 cities in relationship to the number of buildings they have of a certain height or higher. Now, in the last century, 100 meters, about 330 some feet, was considered, anything that large, high, was considered to be a skyscraper. So if you look at that column, that information is provided. You see that New York is way out in front. Hong Kong is big, but not as big. And then number 3 and the rest are quite a ways behind. So it's really a Hong Kong and New York, or New York and Hong Kong story at that level. But that's the old days. Today, 150 meters, which is about 500 feet, which in the old days, you'd have said 10 feet to a floor. That'd be 50 stories. But these days, it's probably more in the 35 to 45 range. And these are tall buildings. And this is those buildings and up to the highest buildings. Everything above that. And you see that list, and that's what you see when you enter the site. That's today's ranking that's considered important. Read that column, and you'll see it very clearly. Now, of the 200 cities, Panama lists is number 16. And you look at the cities that are ahead of it. How many of them are from Latin America? I mean, these huge cities like Mexico City and Rio de Janeiro and Buenos Aires and so on? None. Okay? How many in North America, the U.S. and Canada, have more skyscrapers? 2. The United States and Canada. That's it. They're the only ones that appear. In the U.S., I just made a mistake in that. 2, Canada doesn't have any, but the U.S. has 2, and it's New York and Chicago. That's it. The other cities up there, the other 13 that are ahead of it, one of them is from the Middle East, that's Dubai. No surprise there. And all the rest are Asian. And of course China, but also Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, other nations as well. What you're seeing is where the economic growth has been in this century. And it shows up in these particularly tall buildings. European cities, 150 meters and above? None. With the exception of one, and that's Moscow, which is 24th, if you consider Moscow a European city. But it's just very evident where the growth has been. And you can see it right there. If you go to the 200 meters and above column, which someday may be the standard for skyscrapers, you'll find that we're at 14th. We're just a couple buildings behind Tokyo. We have 2 million people in our metropolitan area. Tokyo has 38 million in its metropolitan area. That's as many people as live in all of California, the most populous state in the U.S. That's more than or roughly the same, a little bit more than the population of Canada. So that's one metropolitan area. And yet we're just behind them in buildings 200 meters and higher. It can be fun if you click on the top of the columns or resort the information at each of the levels by the lowest to the highest. You click it again, you get the highest to the lowest, and so on. It can be sort of interesting. But to me, it's much more informative. It's a general commentary on where the growth has been over these last couple of decades. So if you find it of interest, go ahead and take a look at it. In the meantime, thank you very much for stopping by. I'm glad to talk to you, and I will be back again soon.